So the two speakers today are Professor Ilan Pappé. Ilan Pappé is a professor at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. He's one of the most influential, or probably most influential among the new historians that have changed the way that we think about the history of Israel and Palestinian-Israeli relations from the 1980s onwards. He's published extensively on the topic. I'll perhaps just mention the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, just because of the influence that this volume has had on the work of so many scholars. So Professor Pappé will give us a bit of the historical context that led us to the situation now. And then we're going to have as a second speaker, one of our own UCU East Midlands members, Dr. Victoria Araj. Now, Dr. Victoria is a Palestinian lecturer at the Eleanor Glenville Institute at the University of Lincoln, and she's the UCU membership secretary of the Uni of Lincoln branch, and she hails from Beit Jala near Bethlehem in the West Bank. So I'll pass the thing to Professor Pappé, and thank you very much, and I'll mute myself.
Thank you, Francesco, and thank you for the UCU for inviting me, and hello to everyone who joined us. What I will do, hopefully I'll manage to do within 20 minutes, as was asked of me, is to try and give a historical context to the events that we are unfolding in front of our eyes today. As some of you may remember, when the Secretary General of the United Nations mentioned that while condemning some of the actions of the Hamas on the 7th of October, he also mentioned that one should not forget that these actions were done within a context, or as he put it, not in a vacuum. And he was immediately condemned by Israel as an anti-Semite for just mentioning the context. In fact, in some places, such as Germany today, you are not even allowed to say something like, I condemn, or I don't, or I condemn part of it, but you're not allowed to say even the word but, in order to show that you try to understand the context in which the events unfolded. But I'm sure we all are sensible enough, and in these times, one should say even courageous enough, to insist that there are historical and moral contexts for which one has to examine both the operation of the Hamas on the 7th of October and the Israeli reaction to it that is ongoing now for more than 2 months. And I think that a very good historical point to begin an analysis of the context is to go back to 1948 for several reasons. One is the way that one can understand, and without going back to 1948, it's impossible to understand the way that the Gaza Strip as a geopolitical outfit or structure was established. Because until 1948, there was no Gaza Strip. This is something that was alien to historical Palestine. Gaza was a very nice city with quite a beautiful countryside around it. It benefited from its location on the Via Maris, on the road from Egypt up to the north to Syria and Turkey. And therefore, like so many cities on the Via Maris, on the sea road, it was cosmopolitical, open to influences, and very diversified in its human composition. And that all changed in 1948 when Israel created the Strip. If you look at the map of the Strip, you can see that this is a rectangle with very straight lines. Israel created it in 1948 as a huge refugee camp that would receive the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians it expelled from the central and south of Palestine into the Strip. So The whole area of Gaza was transformed into a huge refugee camp by the end of 1948, and it hosted hundreds of thousands of Palestinians uprooted forcefully by the Israeli troops during what the Palestinians called the Nakba, the catastrophe. The final stage of that, what I called in my book ethnic cleansing, the uprooting of massive numbers of Palestinians into the Gaza Strip, among other places. The final step of that expulsion occurred in the months of November and December of 1948. And in the Israeli archive, there is quite a chilling document from the 25th of November 1948 under the title Order Number 40. And Order Number 40 from the 25th of November 1948 from the Central Command to the troops around the Gaza City enlists 11 Palestinian villages in names. And the order is to occupy these villages, to expel all the people from these villages to Gaza, to burn the houses, because most of the houses were built from clay and straw, and to dismantle the houses that were built from stones. Now, if you look at the map of these 11 villages, you can see that they, on the ruins of that village, of these villages, the settlements that the Hamas attacked on the 7th of October were built. And that explains something about their attitude that Palestinians of any generation within the Gaza Strip have towards that particular part. And maybe some of you would remember what was called the Great March of Return in 2018, when young Palestinians demonstrated near the fence that Israel built encircling the strip and demanded their right of return to their grandparents' lands on the other side of the fence. So that's one historical context which is very important, the connection between the creation of the strip, who were living in the strip before and who was living in the strip after 1948, and what happened to the villages that were around the strip. The second important context of 1948 is the overall attitude of the world to the operations that Israel conducted throughout 1948 or throughout what the Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe. That ethnic cleansing operation by Israel was very well known to the world. Yes, there was no television, there was no internet, there was only radio and printed media. But there were enough representatives of the international community who knew exactly what was going on the ground. And the international community, or those who mattered in the international community, namely heads of states, chief editors of newspapers, the directors of bodies such as the International Red Cross or the Secretary General of the United Nations, all these people and organizations knew exactly what was going on, namely that Israel was massively expelling Palestinians from their villages and towns throughout 1948. That international community decided to remain silent and not condemn Israel for that act that, according to international law, is a crime against humanity. They had their own explanation why they did it. Most of them were talking about the Holocaust and the fact that 3 years after the Holocaust, the Western world does not want to condemn the Jewish state for its crime. And some of them talked in terms such as this is a small injustice that is meant to rectify a much larger injustice. Whatever their own explanation for why they were silent this is not the important part. The important part is that Israel got a very clear message from the international community that ethnic cleansing is a legitimate method by Israel to use as part of its national security policy. And it's not surprising that Israel wanted to use ethnic cleansing as a measure of dealing with the main issue that troubled both the state of Israel and before that the Zionist movement ever since the inception of the movement and its arrival in Palestine in the late 19th century. And the problem was for the Zionist movement that its idea of building a Jewish state and even a democratic Jewish state in historical Palestine was confronted with the reality on the ground. And the reality of the ground was the presence of an indigenous native population that had its own aspirations for self-determination and independence, and resisted the idea that they should agree to the colonization of their homeland. And of course, even were more alert when it was clear that the Zionist movement believed that this colonization should be accompanied by a project of displacement and replacement of the indigenous population. So it was, for the Zionists, a very important means of trying to de-Arabize as much of historical Palestine as possible so that there will be, if not a total Jewish presence, at least a very significant Jewish majority in the land. And this is the main reason for the massive ethnic cleansing that occurred in 1948, and some of you may know, ended with the expulsion of half of Palestine's population, the destruction of half of Palestine's villages, and the demolition of most of the Arab neighborhoods in the urban space of Palestine. And because that was the message, Israel continued to use ethnic cleansing, not always at the same scale as in 1948, in order to advance its idea of how to solve the problem that it created, namely its invasion of a native homeland and the presence of the native people in that homeland. So between 48 and 67, Israel continued to expel Palestinian village from what became the state of Israel. After the occupation, or during the early occupation of the West Bank in June 1967, Israel expelled 300,000 Palestinians to Jordan from the West Bank. And from 1967 until recently, in what one can call an incremental ethnic cleansing, Israel expelled more than 600,000 Palestinians from their homes, both from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So it's a perpetual idea that you have to downsize the number of Palestinians, and every means is justified to get this goal. Now, you can clearly see the context for the events of the 7th of October. Israel used the Hamas attack on the 7th of October as a pretext to use once more ethnic cleansing on the same kind of scope as it used in 1948. Even, I would say, on a larger scope than it used in 1948, hoping that as in 1948, its massive expulsion and displacement of Palestinians would be justified in the eyes of the Western world, or at least in the eyes of the Western government or the global North governments, that would either be reminded of the Holocaust and hopefully from an Israeli perspective would use the same kind of justification for themselves why they are silent when Israel is ethnically cleansing such a large number of Palestinians. And if this is not going to work, the hope from Israel was that given how Israel portrays what happened on the 7th of October as something which is akin to the Holocaust itself, according to the Israeli narrative, its actions should be justified. So far, they have succeeded in at least getting that permission, if you want, from the American administration, quite surprisingly, from a Democratic president and administration that has not yet moved to stop the Israeli ethnic cleansing that also has very strong genocidal sides to its policies. And it remains to be seen whether the Israelis are right that basically the same attitude that allowed them to ethnically cleanse Palestine in 1948 are still strong enough to provide it immunity in its present genocidal policies and ethnic cleansing policy in the Gaza Strip. There is also, and with this, I think I still have some minutes. There is also another historical context that is important to remember when we try to understand what happened on the 7th of October, as well as the Israeli reaction to it. One is probably quite clear, and these are 56 years of occupation, both of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and one should remember that the Gaza Strip and the West Bank are one nation. It's one group. It's the same families, the same people, and so on. So whatever Israel did in the West Bank affects very much the people of the Gaza Strip, and vice versa. And in those 56 years, as many of you would remember and know, Israel imposed a ruthless military regime replaced by what they call a civil administration, which is as bad as the military regime that was established in 1981, and continued with a different structure after the Oslo agreement in 1933. Throughout all these structures, the military regime, the civil administration, and the Oslo Accord arrangement, throughout these different three political structures of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip until 2006, 2007, Israel imposed that ruthless military, a ruthless oppressive regime that included massive arrests of people without trial, demolition of houses, ethnic cleansing, as I mentioned before, massive colonization with Jewish settlers who became themselves a force that harassed and attacked the local population, and other measures that were in the repertoire of collective punishment that Israel borrowed from the colonialist powers such as Britain in the past. And that altogether brought to two uprisings, as we know, in 1987 and 2000, and things have only got worse after 2000. So in many ways, a third uprising was on the cards. Nobody knew exactly how it would take place. I don't think anybody in 2000 would have described the uprising of the 7th of October in the way it unfolded, but it was very clear that this is the millions of Palestinians who live under these conditions would not accept it as something that they have to reconcile with. And finally, there is, of course, the more recent past, which is important, and this is the change in the Israeli policy towards the Gaza Strip around 2005, 2006. While Israel feels, and unfortunately one should say quite rightly so, that it found a way of maintaining the occupation of the West Bank through the collaboration of the Palestinian Authority, through the division of the area to areas A and B and C, and creating, although there is an unrest and there is resistance, I feel that it can quite easily continue to hold the West Bank. But it always had a problem with the Gaza Strip. It didn't have the same ability to maintain its power in the Gaza Strip. So they kept thinking of how to deal with it. So in 2000, as you probably all remember, in 2005, the Israelis said, okay, our main problem in the Gaza Strip is that we have a small number of settlers there compared to the West Bank, and they are a liability and not an asset. So Israel decided to take out these settlers, and it hoped, and this didn't happen, that it could create another PA-controlled area in the Gaza Strip. That was the Israeli plan. And Israel could not prevent democratic elections that also included the Gaza Strip in 2006. And as we all know, the people of Gaza elected the Hamas and did not invite the PA to be the ruler of the Strip. Israel immediately reacted with a new method of collective punishment, a land siege and naval blockade on the Strip. And any Palestinian in the Gaza Strip today who is around the ages of 17 to 20 or 22, which is this is the age group of the people who launched the attack on the 7th of October, anyone at that age knows only one reality, and that is the reality of the land siege and the naval blockade that leads to starvation, to trauma, to a sense of being incarcerated in a big prison or in a big ghetto. And if this was not enough, Israel bombarded 4 times this ghetto from the air with lethal aircraft, such as F-15, later F-35, dropping tons of TNT on urban and civilian spaces. By now, Israel dropped more TNT on Gaza than the 2 nuclear bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in the Second World War. You have to understand what these people were going through in terms of living under such conditions. And that is the generation that decided in the 7th of October it had enough and tried to rebel against it. That doesn't mean that, at least I'm talking now totally personally, that I condone everything that they did. I don't. I condemn some of the actions that the Hamas did. I think they didn't serve them very well doing that. But I do understand the circumstances in which these operations took place and the way that they developed on the 7th of October. And I would finish by saying that as historians, we're not supposed to be cold-minded, kind of without a moral perspective. And I would add, finally, to these historical perspective that I provided for you, I would add also a moral perspective, and I think it's important. Although we don't have a full picture of what happened in the morning of the 7th of October, there's still many unknown facts, and it will take time until we understand exactly who did what to whom. And the fact that the Israelis have the narrative doesn't convince me because I don't trust their information. But it's clear to me that from what we know, what is visible, taking babies and old people in their 80s to the other side is ridiculous, is abusive and totally unacceptable. But the moral context is very important in almost all the anti-colonial struggles in history and almost in all anti-oppression struggles in history. The colonized, the oppressed, resort sometimes to actions that are, if you want, in our modern language, are violations of international law or the moral code that most of us would endorse. But these aberrations have never led in the history of anti-colonialist struggles and anti-oppression struggle to invalidate the struggles themselves. And that's very important. And I will finish by giving 2 examples, which I think are very relevant. One is in 1831, an African slave by the name of Nat Turner slaughtered with his friends families of slave owners in the United States. But nobody said that because of that, the struggle against slavery was invalid. And in the summer of 1962, in July 1962, members of the Algerian liberation movement slaughtered French settlers and their families in the city of Oran in Algeria. And again, nobody said that because of that, the struggle for liberation of Algeria was unjustified, or people stopped supporting the decolonization of Algeria and its liberation. And we have so many other examples. So there's no need to try and idealize the Palestinian struggle. It would be wrong to idealize or romanticize it, but it's equally important to continue to justify it, to support it, and above all, now to focus on the way the Israelis are using the 7th of October as a pretext for genocidal policies and policies of ethnic cleansing, not just as retaliation for what happened, but as what they think is an opportunity to pursue immoral policies that they were more reluctant to use in the past, believing that now they have a free license to do so. So I think that is very important this distinction between a pretext that Israel is using and the context that explains, not only does explain what happened, but also opens a much better door, or a much better perspective on the way of getting out of this situation and preventing as much as possible the next cycle of violence. So I think I'll stop here, and thank you for your patience and listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pappé. This really sets the historical context, and in 25 minutes, I think it's an incredible achievement to cover so much ground. So thank you very much. Thanks for accepting our invitation. I would like now to ask Victoria if you, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Oh,
yes.
Perfect. Sure. Okay. In Cultural Cleansing, Why Museums Were Looted, Libraries Burned, and Academics Murdered, published by Pluto Press in 2009, a debate emerged on the genocide of systems, not just communities. In the case of this book, the education system of Iraq with the illegal invasion of 2003. The premeditated murder of Iraq's intellectual class and the wholesale destruction of the higher education system was deemed to constitute a new crime termed educide. It was then proposed by scholars of international law, such as Rula Alusi, that educide should be picked up by the ICJ and ICC. Perhaps if it had been, there might be some accountability for the crimes against Iraq, and also not so much of a resounding silence from British higher education institutions about the educide of Palestine. On the current crime of educide in Palestine, BRICUP have noted the occupation forces have closed 19 higher education institutions in Gaza, denying 88,000 students the right to education completely. 219 educational institutions were destroyed, and that includes the destruction of 12 buildings in 3 universities in Gaza: Al-Azhar University, Al-Quds Open University, and the Islamic University. According to the Ministry of Higher Education, as of the 5th of November, 432 students and 14 staff faculty were killed. We do know that many more have been killed since then, and we now do not know the full extent of their massacre. We know the president of the Islamic University of Gaza, the decorated Professor Soufiane Taïeh, and his family were killed in an Israeli bombing in the north of Gaza in Jabaliyah on the 2nd of December. We also know of the death of Professor Mohammed Eid Shubair, his wife Rehab, their daughter-in-law Najat Ayub al-Helu, and their eldest son Mohammed Malik Shubair in an Israeli airstrike on their home in the vicinity of the destroyed Al-Shifa hospital. Of course, we also know that thousands of academics are injured and most are unable to receive treatment, with open wounds and immense suffering due to the collapse of the healthcare system. And what of our own students here? What of the Gazan students at universities in the UK? They do suffer from the extreme trauma of not being able to contact or support their loved ones, on top of a hostile environment of dehumanization from the universities that are supposed to safeguard them. There is something really scary and terrifyingly different about silence in Gaza's war this time. There is the silence from loved ones unable to charge their phones in Gaza and not being able to know if what's going on. Colleagues used to message me constantly during previous wars, distressed from the relentless bombing, now quiet as their priorities shift to finding herbs to eat or some dirty water to drink. There is a scary silence from the wider student body too. The mass occupations for the 2008 Gaza war that were so formative for me, so active and so radical, replaced by quiet peace vigils, along with the resounding silence that echoes loudly from our neoliberal profiteer institutions who loved fanning the flames of war in Ukraine, comfortable with the growth in the arms contracts that kept the VCs at their golf clubs. Perhaps I naively thought the assassination of a scholar poet committed to peace would move them. 5 days ago, the occupation forces targeted the sister's home of 44-year-old Rafa'at al-Arir, a prominent English literature professor at the Islamic University of Gaza, and his family. He had moved time and time again after numerous death threats, not wanting his public profile to put others at risk. He was killed along with his brother, Saleh, his nephew, his sister Asma, and 3 of her children, and a neighbour. Not only was he committed to a pedagogy of love with his students, he was committed to a pedagogy of hope beyond Gaza and beyond Palestine. In the website he co-founded, We Are Not Numbers, he elevated the voices of Gaza's youth into our living rooms. A sobering account on the website has been written by a student of Al-Azhar University, Hamza Ibrahim, who mourns the loss of his university campus. He says, the light of education that illuminates the darkness of my life has been cut off. My memories, my education, and my wonderful days on campus are blown away with the wind. I spent many amazing days at Islamic University with my colleagues before I graduated. When I would enter the vast campus, I would feel like I was inside a beautiful mini city. My friends and I used to gather to study under the ornamental trees that lined the campus, so we felt the beauty of nature even as we learned. When we finished studying, we would go drink coffee at a shop on campus, the best coffee of any university in Palestine. I would love the library. I would seclude myself there and escape from the noise of the world. I would relax into one of its plush fabric-covered foam chairs and literally merge into my reading. Now it is destroyed. The feeling in my heart is like giving the sun a last kiss as it sets into the sea and the darkness comes all around you. My life has become a dark sky without stars or colourful clouds. Growing up Palestinian, of course, the right to education and the importance of education as resistance and liberation is hammered into our souls. We know the meaning of Intifada includes as much a renaissance as it does a revolt. Coming from myself, coming from a family of educators, during my childhood, I would learn about the lessons continuing in the living rooms of Beit Sahur during the first Intifada. We also know, like Rafa'at did, that the liberation struggle is as much a matter of the pen as the stone. in a way, it is that which partly proves so disappointing with dealing with the lack of response from our higher education institutions, the institutions who cite Edward Said and Men in the Sun, whilst decolonising curriculums through a new white settler lens that silences the Palestinians unpublished. They stole our land, they stole our books in the Nakba, they stole our future, they steal the lives of our students and our children. Why was I surprised when even the concept of decolonisation has been stolen from us? Nonetheless, we Palestinians are stubborn. We do not let things slide, and we try every avenue through every means necessary. Of course, the trade union movement being just one such avenue. As a Palestinian student, I spoke at the UCU conference in 2008 to push for the boycott of Israeli academic institutions engaged in war crimes during that time. I felt safe there, and it was a safety in numbers. Even though us Palestinian students were intimidated by a small group of members who took photos and harassed us, the love and solidarity I felt from the broader union made me feel at home and encouraged me to continue my studies, to be part of such vibrant debates. However, we see the edugicide starting to creep into university institutions in this country as they try to shut down Palestine. However, Palestinians do not let things lie. But we also do not do things alone. We shout loudly, but we do so collectively. And we can do that here and through our union because we have each other. They may be able to suspend members, fire members, but they cannot fire and suspend us in our hundreds or thousands. I don't want to scare you, but the less we act, the more ingrained this madness becomes a reality in other contexts. Collateral damage was never a word until the Iraq War. Words matter in this dystopia. Do not normalize edugicide as a tool of war, not in Palestine, not anywhere. Speak up as the Palestinian education institutions and education unions, your Palestinian colleagues demand. As Mandela, who decorates the walls of our institutions, and decolonizing initiatives demanded that there is no freedom without the freedom of the Palestinians. I leave you with this poem by our colleague Rafa'at. Make sure to shout it from the rooftops, write it on the walls, demand it onto your curriculum, and I really, really do hope the next time I see you, it will be in an action of solidarity, whether that be through words, through protest, but collectively we must, and you must, you all, please, I am asking you as my colleagues to act against this edugicide and protect the right to education for Palestinians. Rafat's poem. If I must die, you must live. To tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze, and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I think on behalf of all of us, thanks so much for, well, first of all, drawing our attention towards education. I think very often, I'm the first one who often forgets about education because it kind of, it remains one of the things that we don't engage with as much as some others. Perhaps it doesn't make the news as much. And also for sharing the sort of more personal aspect to that. And I think there's a fantastic starting point for a reflection. And you said some very important things about the role of the union as well. So I want to just take a moment more to thank you and Professor Pappé for the fantastic presentations. They've been absolutely great, and you